I knew something was terribly wrong the second I walked into that meeting and saw my calendar had mysteriously cleared itself. There were no pings, no reminders, just a single vague line at 9 in the morning. Check-in with human resources joining. That is not a check-in. That is a guillotine appointment wrapped in corporate frosting. I shut the door behind me, looked at the empty chairs, and realized they were not late. I was early, and it was not by accident. Let us rewind before this powder keg went completely off. 12 years. That is how long I gave them. I helped build Apex Solutions out of a shared office space with water-stained ceiling tiles and a microwave that once caught fire because someone tried to heat up a breakfast sandwich in the wrapper. I still remember the night I pushed the first line of production code at 3 in the morning with greasy hair and a half-dead laptop battery. We had no funding, no user interface, no backup plan. Just stubbornness and way too much caffeine. We built a platform that scaled faster than our headcount. And me? I was the one duct taping the back end with every patch and sanity-saving commit. They called me the brain back then. Daniel, the silent engine. Daniel, who never missed a deadline. Daniel, who was too valuable to replace. It is funny how too valuable becomes too difficult once the chief executive officer's daughter decides she wants to be seen as the visionary. Anyway, fast forward to last quarter. I am still running point on system architecture, but the invites to leadership synchronizations start disappearing. 1 week, it is an excuse about a mistake. The next week, it is a claim that they are trying to streamline meetings. Suddenly, I am not on product briefings. I am not looped in on roadmap updates. My messages are met with thumbs-up reactions and absolute radio silence. I did not need a whiteboard to see the writing on the wall. Samantha, the founder's daughter, had officially taken the reins. She was 34, had an expensive business degree, and had never written a single line of code in her life, but she had strong feelings about user journeys and liked to say things like, "Data is the new oil," in every company town hall. I did not hate her at first. She was energetic, confident, and wore designer shoes that cost more than a server rack. But slowly, her energy started replacing our hard-earned experience. Longtime team leads were being swapped for social media darlings with flashy resumes. The culture shifted from getting the job done to projecting the right image. I was not part of that image. I played along. I did not push back. I did not protest when Samantha brought in her old college roommate as vice president of vision alignment. I did not roll my eyes in meetings. I just kept doing what I have always done, solving the impossible with logic and sheer willpower. Then came the company rebrand. We got new logos, a new motto, and a suddenly very public push to highlight fresh voices. Guess who was not asked to write the engineering blog anymore? I became the ghost in the machine, still fixing things, still being called when production broke at 2 in the morning, but otherwise invisible until that human resources calendar invite showed up. And here is the kicker. The night before that meeting, I found myself pulling open a folder on my drive I had not touched in a decade. Founding documents from 2011, buried deep in my personal cloud archive, beneath layers of old cap table spreadsheets, incorporation letters, and intellectual property assignments. Something about the silence around me, the way I had been erased without even being confronted, stirred a low hum in the back of my skull. Back at my desk, I opened the drawer and started packing. I did not do it frantically or performatively. I was just methodical. I packed 2 glass awards for Architect of the Year, a framed photo of the founding team at our Series A funding party, and a worn stress ball. I left the cheap company mug and the branded notebook. I did not feel like feeding the vulture souvenirs. Then I did something that at the time probably looked like absent-minded forgetfulness. I placed my badge on the desk and beside it laid a slim black folder. It had no label, no logo, just matte black with a slightly frayed edge. I did not say a word. I did not make a scene. I walked out of Apex Solutions for what they assumed was the last time. There were no tantrums, no resistance, just a man who knew exactly where the bodies were buried and had kept all the receipts. My departure message was 3 simple words that hit the company chat like a lit match dropped in a puddle of gasoline. You could almost hear the digital chatter erupting in every open tab. The general thread went quiet, but the direct messages turned into a casino at midnight, flashing and buzzing. Everyone was suddenly very interested in what just happened. Some folks reacted fast, the ones who owed Samantha favors or wanted to be on the right side of her career glow-up. They wished me the best in my future endeavors and posted with forced smiley faces. A few engineers added crying reactions, and one posted a single broken heart. But the real conversation was happening elsewhere, in the locked channels, in backroom side chats, in private video calls that no one would admit were happening. The whispers were not about me being gone. They were about how fast and quiet it had been. There was no announcement, no town hall, no thank you to one of the original builders. I was just gone, like I had never existed. Samantha, of course, was not about to let the silence speak. Mid-afternoon, she jumped on an all-hands call that had not been on anyone's calendar an hour prior. Her camera was perfectly angled, and her background screamed that we were crushing it, complete with soft lighting and a plant she probably had never watered. She smiled like a cat who had just eaten the neighbor's canary. She chirped her greetings and said she wanted to share some exciting updates. Exciting. That word always means someone is about to get screwed. She paused just long enough to let her words settle before announcing they had made the difficult decision to part ways with me. Former vice president, she called me, like I had not been part of the team before there was a team. She thanked me for my past work, already scanning her notes for the next line, but to move forward with their innovation roadmap. They needed leadership that was agile, aligned, and collaborative. Dead weight slows down velocity, she implied. There it was. She did not say it directly, but she did not have to it. It was in her tone, the twitch of her eye, and the smug little smirk when she used velocity like it was a weapon. I watched the recording later. My phone had buzzed with a notification about it before I even made it to the parking garage. By the time I sat behind the wheel of my 2015 sedan, the one I never upgraded because I was too busy pouring my equity into the company, I had seen enough. I did not cry, did not scream, did not even flinch. I opened my laptop on the passenger seat, tethered it to my phone, and found the file. It was Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 201, Subsection B, the work made for hire exception. Back when we incorporated, I refused to sign the standard intellectual property assignment without an addendum. My lawyer drafted a specific written agreement, signed by the original founder, expressly stating that I retained the copyright to the foundational source code until a unanimous board buyout occurred. Without that buyout, the code was not a work made for hire. It belonged to me. If they fired me without executing the buyout clause, they were running a multi-million-dollar platform on stolen property. I clicked compose on my email client and sent one line to my attorney. The game was on. The fallout started almost instantly. Less than 72 hours after my forced departure, Samantha was on a stage in San Francisco announcing that Apex Solutions was entering final negotiations for acquisition by Vertex Technologies. Vertex was a monstrous data consolidation conglomerate with a habit of swallowing startups and bleeding their intellectual property. $200 million. That was the number being whispered in investor circles, blasted in some press leaks, and hinted at in breathless messages between employees, wondering what their stock options might finally be worth. I knew it was not about the money for her completely. It was about legacy. Samantha did not want to lead Apex. She wanted to own the ending, to be the name people remembered, the one on the podium doing that fake laugh executives do when they pretend a reporter asked a hard question. But there was one tiny detail she did not announce: due diligence. The technology press loves to cover acquisitions like fairy tale weddings, but behind every big buyout is a team of lawyers and risk officers digging through every document ever signed by the company. They review cap tables, vesting schedules, intellectual property agreements, privacy disclosures, and even boardroom minutes from 2011, especially those. Which is why 1 week after Samantha's announcement, a woman named Andrea, senior counsel for Vertex's merger division, started making polite but increasingly pointed requests. She requested full equity signatory archives, documentation of founder exits, and intellectual property origination verification. And while all that was happening, I vanished. I made no professional network posts, no scorned founder rants. Just silence. The kind of silence that makes people uncomfortable, that turns curiosity into dread. Samantha had expected me to post something dramatic, maybe even something desperate. But I gave them nothing. I did not update my title, did not reply to the emails from former teammates, did not even cancel my company calendar. I let it run out like a ghost account no one had the nerve to delete. I knew Samantha had eyes everywhere now, scanning for backlash, monitoring sentiment. The fact that I was not making a sound was the backlash, because silence makes people nervous, especially when that silence used to know every root password and every licensing agreement. Meanwhile, Samantha was smiling her way through pitch calls with Vertex, boasting about our scalable infrastructure, the one I designed. She talked about our flexible application programming interfaces, the ones I patched during a holiday outage when she was still in college. She spun my work like tinsel around a flaming tree. In the background, Andrea and her team kept digging. It started small, a request to review the 2011 shareholder agreement in full. Samantha brushed it off. She claimed they had since updated the cap table and that legacy documents were immaterial. Andrea asked again, this time copying the lead investor. Then came a third request, this one with a list of questions. Could they confirm there was a formal board vote for the removal of the founding technical officer? Was investor consent documented and unanimous? Please attach proof. I knew Samantha was feeling the heat because suddenly she posted a team photo on her professional network. Big smiles, tagging the executive team, with a caption claiming the future was brighter than ever. A distraction, plain as day, but her hands were already shaking behind the scenes. The investors' counsel, a man named Neil, who once reduced a junior partner to tears during a Series B review, had been copied on the last email. When he got involved, the tone changed because Neil knew me, and Neil remembered the work made for hire exception. Neil was not just some suit. He had been on the original formation call back when Apex was 5 people and a dream. He was the one who argued for a clause that protected the technical foundation in case some idiot tried to innovate out the person who actually built the system. He knew why it existed. If Samantha had not gotten unanimous consent to terminate me, that clause had just been triggered. But Samantha did not know that yet. She still thought she had won. And me? I was sitting in my kitchen with a warm cup of coffee, reading Andrea's follow-up emails forwarded from my attorney, smiling like a man watching a mouse rearrange the furniture before a hurricane. The rope was tightening, and I was not even pulling. The cracks did not explode all at once. They started as hairlines, quiet, unnoticed, insignificant if you were not looking closely. But the thing about hairline cracks is they multiply, and when you start stacking pressure on top of them, say the weight of a $200 million acquisition, they do not just widen, they break. It started with one email, just one, tucked inside a thread about cap table reconciliation and signatory verification. The subject line asked for a follow-up on historical document requests from Neil, the lead counsel for the majority investor in Apex, to Samantha, copying the legal, finance, and due diligence teams. He asked for original signatory history from 2011, preferring original document scans, not transcriptions. That was all he said, but the subject matter was lethal. Samantha read it twice, her eyes narrowing. Her first instinct was the same one most overconfident people have when confronted with legacy documentation. Ignore it, brush it off, redirect. She replied that they had since updated all equity structures and governance language, and that historical documents were not materially relevant to the acquisition process. But she was happy to confirm with their internal counsel. It was a non-answer dressed up like a yes. Classic Samantha. But Neil was not buying it, because behind that polite tone was a subtle shift. Neil never asked for cap table updates. He asked for signatory history, originals, wet ink, founding fingerprints. Somewhere in a glassy office, Samantha was still in full performance mode. She kept pushing through the due diligence, hopping on calls, reciting buzzwords, feeding them slide decks I once designed. But while she performed, someone much lower on the food chain noticed something odd. A junior analyst, smart, underpaid, terrified of making mistakes, was combing through system access logs for an audit spreadsheet when she stumbled onto a dormant internal code repository titled Core Foundation Backup. It had not been touched in years, just archived, buried beneath layers of platform updates and modern branches. But there it was with metadata timestamped to the very beginning. All the foundational intellectual property, load balancers, routing logic, early encryption protocols, still linked to my internal author identifier. And next to that, a permissions field stating foundational intellectual property rights reserved. The analyst did not know what that meant, but she knew enough to be scared, because unlike newer repositories, this one had a legal lock on it. A lock tied not to the company, but to me. She flagged it to her manager. The manager flagged it to legal team. Legal paused a scheduled diligence call with Vertex halfway through a presentation about scalability projections. They muted the executive mid-sentence and asked who authorized the termination of the founding technical officer. Silence followed. Not the kind that happens when someone is thinking. The kind that happens when someone realizes they have driven off a cliff and are still in midair waiting for gravity to catch up. Samantha blinked, then smiled, trying to play it cool. She claimed they had an internal process and that I had signed my exit paperwork. The associate counsel on the call, a man who had not said a word the entire meeting, suddenly unmuted. He asked if unanimous investor consent was obtained. Her expression flickered. She asked him to clarify. He clarified that as outlined in the intellectual property assignment addendum from the original shareholder agreement, the copyright ownership exception required full investor consent for termination without a buyout. Unanimous. Another silence fell. This one was heavier because now she knew that they knew. Samantha tried to pivot, suggesting the clause was superseded in Series C and she would have to double-check. The lawyer did not blink. He asked her to please do so and to send the supersession language along with the original signatory trail, stating they would need both today. She muted her microphone and off-camera threw a pen across the room hard enough to leave a mark in the drywall. Meanwhile, I was sipping chamomile tea on my porch, watching the wind twist the dead leaves into tiny whirlpools on the steps. I was not checking my professional networks. I was not reading the company chat rumors. I was not writing think pieces or complaining about betrayal. I was doing the one thing Samantha had not planned for it. I was waiting quietly, patiently, because you do not yank the spine out of a company and expect it to keep walking straight. Not when the spine has claws. Diligence froze like a dead laptop at 2% battery during a thunderstorm. 1 minute, Vertex's acquisition team was firing off checklists, asking for second quarter projections, and slapping smiley faces on alignment memos. The next minute, everything turned ice cold. Emails went unanswered. Calendar invites vanished. Pending clarification became the phrase of the week. That is corporate speak for something is rotten and nobody wants to touch it without gloves and a liability waiver. And the rot was the intellectual property addendum. The clause that was never meant to be a problem, because in Samantha's mind, I was never meant to matter. When the request came in for clarification, not just of the clause itself, but of the decision trail leading to my termination, Samantha spun hard. She got on calls, patted hands, and threw every polished sentence she had into the fire. She claimed my role was largely ceremonial by the end, that I had not been involved in technical decision-making for months, and that I agreed to step down. There was no resistance, she said. Funny how silence gets rebranded when the consequences show up. But investors do not deal in vibes and vague memories. They deal in risk. And Samantha, for all her confidence, had just dumped a live grenade into the middle of their exit strategy. Niels, the same investor counsel who sent the original request, called for an emergency board meeting. There were no emojis, no exclamation points. Just urgent board only at 4 in the afternoon. Samantha's team tried to stall. One director was on vacation in the mountains. Another had a conflict with an earnings call. Neil did not care. He rescheduled it twice, then locked the date. Attendance required. Non-compliance will be noted, which in investor speak is basically a death threat. Inside the company, the mood shifted like a tide pulling out before a tsunami. The bravado died down. The performative posts about new beginnings and inspiring leadership dried up. Even Kelly from Human Resources, who had smiled while handing me my termination packet, stopped showing up in meetings with her camera on. You could feel it, that uncomfortable quiet, the kind that follows a joke. Nobody laughed at them. Except this joke had a $200 million punchline, and Samantha's signature was in ink. And me? I did not post, did not reach out, but I did meet with 2 people. The first was my attorney, the same one I had emailed from the parking lot. We met in a downtown office that still smelled like fresh carpet glue. She wore a gray suit and spoke in the calm, lethal tone of someone who has never lost an argument in her life. I handed her everything. The black folder, the old intellectual property timestamps, a printed copy of Samantha's public statements, and a brief email chain I had saved from 2018, where the founder had written that as long as Daniel is with us, the intellectual property is protected. The second meeting was across town. A small cafe, a back table, no laptop, just 2 cups of burnt diner coffee, and a woman named Meredith, a journalist who once did a 5-part series on corporate retaliation in technology and made 3 chief executives cry on record. She was not flashy. She wore hiking boots to interviews, but she listened like her brain had hard drives in it. I did not give her everything, just enough. I told her the story quietly, chronologically. No exaggerations, no hyperbole, just the facts. Who built what? Who signed what? Who pretended none of it mattered until the consequences walked through the door wearing legal shoes. She listened, took notes, then said one thing before sliding her recorder back into her coat pocket. She said they were going to wish I had screamed. She was right because silence is forgivable. Silence can be spun. But cold clinical documentation backed by legal teeth and timestamp server logs, that is lethal. Back at Apex, Samantha tried one more desperation play. She ordered the communications team to prepare a statement reaffirming leadership stability and momentum. She had the gall to start it with a line about how transitions are natural in innovation-driven environments. But the statement never made it past the draft phase. Because that afternoon, Neil walked into the boardroom with a printed copy of the 2011 Intellectual Property Agreement, laid it flat on the polished walnut table, and asked a single question. Could anyone there show him where this clause was nullified? No one answered. Samantha looked at the paper like it had bitten her, because that was the moment she realized the plan I never said out loud was unfolding, and she was already trapped inside it. The memo was not supposed to leak. It was drafted behind closed doors by Apex's external legal team, marked confidential in bold, double-underlined font, stuffed with words like exposure, breach scenario, and high-risk termination event. It was never meant for public consumption. It was not even sent to the full board. At first, just a select group of directors, investor representatives, and one increasingly sweaty general counsel who was now rereading his own email trail with pure dread. But somehow, miraculously, mysteriously, deliciously, the memo got out. A grainy screen grab passed along via encrypted messaging, showed up on at least 3 venture capital group chats, 2 competitor workspaces, and one particularly gossipy product manager's private server. Title: Termination of Founding Technical Officer, Risk of Breach. First line: Immediate review recommended due to potentially unenforceable dismissal and violation of Intellectual Property Protection Clause with implications for ownership and downstream compliance liability. They fired the man who built their rocket engine while they were halfway to Mars, and now the oxygen system belonged to him. The fallout started immediately. One board member, an older man who had been grandfathered in from the early days and always looked vaguely annoyed by everything digital, stepped down without a press release or explanation. He just sent a resignation letter, a short email to the group, and made a frantic call to his private wealth manager. Another board member, a younger, more litigation-savvy type, did not step down. He lawyered up fast and demanded indemnity coverage from Apex for any consequences arising from misrepresented founder agreements. The chief financial officer tried to calm him down. He responded by copying the fund's risk advisor on every message moving forward. Samantha started spiraling. Her public face still smiled on professional networks and remained cheery. The company's social media still posted memes about innovation being a team sport. But behind closed doors, she was hemorrhaging support. Her messages were getting one-word replies. The vice president of operations postponed their weekly synchronization 3 times in a row. Legal stopped pre-clearing her talking points. The once tightly curated palace she had built around herself was developing hairline fractures that were starting to look suspiciously like exit wounds. Then she did what they always do when the ladder starts shaking. She tried to call me. The first time I ignored it and let it go to voicemail. The second time she used a different number, her assistant's line. I declined again. The third was a text message saying we needed to talk and that this was getting out of control. I did not respond. Not because I did not have anything to say, but because silence was louder. It always is, especially when the one being ignored knows you are choosing not to answer. While she was busy calling and spiraling and rearranging board alliances like a drunk block-stacking player, something else happened. My exit paperwork, the same packet she slid across that table with a grin 2 weeks prior, ended up in the inbox of a woman named Lorraine. Lorraine is a regulatory compliance consultant, and not just any consultant. She specializes in merger audits and federal technology compliance reviews. She used to work for the government, where she once made an artificial intelligence startup dissolve because its facial recognition model was trained on illegally acquired prison photographs. She now consults for 3 different alphabet agencies and has a reputation for sniffing out fraud like a bloodhound. She received the exit paperwork in a sealed envelope. There was no return address, no note, just the documents. Inside was a copy of my termination packet, annotated with sticky tabs, highlighting inconsistencies in procedure, missing signatures, and most notably the absence of any investor consent documentation or buyout execution. She read it 3 times, then flagged it for potential regulatory escalation under federal technology asset guidelines. That meant Apex's acquisition deal could now be reviewed not just for intellectual property conflict, but for federal compliance breach. Samantha had no idea. Yet she was still pacing through meetings, tossing out half measures, calling in favors that were no longer being answered. Her last act of desperation was offering a posthumous tribute video to me at the next town hall. She suggested they celebrate my contributions with a short montage to show appreciation. The communications team refused. One of them leaked the suggestion to Meredith, the journalist I had spoken with over coffee, who immediately posted online that without context, it is too late for flowers when the grave is still warm. I did not smile when I read it, but I did refill my tea, logged off, and watched the rain beat on the window like Morse code. The reckoning was not just approaching. It was already in the building, badge scanned, walking straight for her office. The boardroom was too quiet for a Monday. No one shuffled papers. No one refreshed their email. Even the air conditioning system seemed to be holding its breath. Samantha sat at the head of the long walnut table, flanked by her chief operating officer on one side, a guy who built his career on buzzwords and network polls, and the company's general counsel, who looked like he had not slept since the leaked memo detonated across the investor circuit like a white-collar bomb. Neil, lead counsel for the majority investor, sat across from her with a thick binder. The binder was the one with the original shareholder agreement inside, printed on old, slightly yellowed paper that still smelled like ink and panic. His fingers were already flipping through it page by page. Everyone else sat silent, watching. The only sound was the rhythmic slide of Neil's fingers over the pages until it stopped. He leaned back, adjusted his glasses, and read aloud, his voice slow, deliberate, and weaponized. He read that in the event of an involuntary removal of the designated founding technical officer, unanimous consent of all investors, and a full buyout execution shall be required prior to execution of termination. Failure to obtain said consent shall result in immediate reversion of foundational intellectual property rights to said officer. He looked up, and the silence bent under the weight of what he just said. Samantha's mouth opened slightly. She claimed I signed the exit paperwork, implying consent. Neil's eyes narrowed, not in confusion, but in the kind of astonishment reserved for watching someone intentionally stick a fork in a toaster. He told her she signed a termination package, and that is not consent. That is compliance under false pretenses. He pointed out she never brought this to the board, never got consent, and acted unilaterally. She started to speak, but he was not done. He stood, placed both palms on the polished wood, and told her she just triggered hostile intellectual property reversion rights. The sentence dropped like a hammer through glass. The chief operating officer leaned back so fast, his chair nearly toppled. The general counsel muttered something about needing to consult notes and reached for a water bottle with hands that visibly shook. The vice president of finance looked like she was halfway through mentally updating the cap table with zero confidence she would get it right. Samantha's face drained to the color of a stale office pastry. She asked what he was saying. Neil cut in, stating that the man she fired holds control of the core technology their entire platform runs on. And because of her negligence, that control had reverted to him legally. Samantha hissed at him to fix it, to call me, to offer me more stock, or to write a settlement. Neil straightened and said I had already spoken to legal and to the press. I did not want a settlement. He paused, glancing at the rest of the board, and added that I wanted her gone. A murmur rippled down the table. Neil did not raise his voice. He did not have to it. He just pulled out a second document, a printed email chain between my counsel and the acquiring company's legal team. He read that I offered to license the intellectual property back to Apex at my sole discretion, but only after leadership changes were formalized, including the removal of the current chief executive officer for material breach and misrepresentation. Samantha's lips parted in disbelief. She stammered that this was her company. Neil's face stayed stone cold. He told her it was until she torched the clause that gave her permission to sit in that chair. The board chair, a former telecommunications executive with a shark's eyes and a pension tied directly to this acquisition, finally spoke. He asked how fast they could replace her completely. Samantha turned toward him like she had been slapped. Her voice shaking, she asked if he was siding with me. He replied that he was not siding with me, he was siding with the deal, and she had just become the liability. Samantha stood, her fists clenched. She claimed they all knew what she was trying to do, that she was cleaning house and moving them forward. Neil said she was bulldozing her foundation, and now the house was sliding into a crater. She looked at each person in the room, hoping for a nod, a glance, anything that said they had her back. But all she got were lowered eyes and tight jaws. She reached for the binder. Neil put his hand on it first. He told her there would be no more edits and no more spin. This was not a public relations problem. It was a governance failure. She walked me out without reading the one clause that could destroy this deal. And just like that, the woman who had fired me with a smirk and a manila envelope realized she was not leading the company anymore. She was getting fired by it, fired by her own arrogance, by the ghost of a clause she never bothered to read. The filing hit the wire at 7 in the morning on the East Coast. It was brief, clinical, and bloodless on the surface. It stated that the Apex Solutions acquisition was delayed due to an internal intellectual property review